Welcome to Optimization in Engineering, Scalar and Multi-Objective. In this video we will speak about Metaheuristic optimization techniques. So the content of the video are: point out the limits of deterministic pointwise searches on non-convex functions that we found in the last video, introduce a way to escape some of these limitations, and define a probabilistic acceptance criterion. We will move on to the definition of metaheuristic techniques and their main characteristics. And, eventually, what we will see are the working principles of three metaheuristic paradigms that are evolutionary strategy, particle swarm, and artificial immune system. So, heuristic and metaheuristic. Heuristic is a rule of thumb, an algorithm that does not guarantee a solution but reduces the number of possible solutions by discarding unlikely and irregular solutions. This was defined by one of the fathers of this Lisp, the language of artificial intelligence, in 1985. Heuristic is usually a rule that is problem-specific, so it's just used for some particular problem but can give little help on other problems. Instead, metaheuristics is a general exploration method, often stochastic, that applies in the same way to many different problems. This is a more recent definition that can frame the topic that we will tackle now. So we come again to the discussion about exploitation and exploration. The deterministic pointwise strategies presented in the previous video are tried to exploit information they have collected in their search to look for new points. They do this accepting only new configurations that are better than the previous ones already met. This means that they are quick to converge to the optimal point on some functions. For instance, for the Newton move, if we have a quadratic function, we could jump directly to the minimum in just one move. But they are prone to be trapped in local optimum, as they check only the current point, the neighborhood, but they have no idea of what's going on outside. For this reason, they are sometimes called greedy algorithms, that they look only for a gain without accounting for possible deterioration of the objective function. Just as an example, let's think again to the two minima function. And we say that we have a local minimum b and a global minimum a. Well, think that our search brought us to the b point, and we make a local exploration around b, for instance around the blue circle centered on the b. We will see that all the points that we find are higher than the value of the function point in b. And so in the end we conclude that this is a minimum, and so our search stops. To move from point B to point A requires an uphill move that no greedy algorithm would accept. A way to overcome this is to accept, sometimes, a deterioration of the objective function. The Metropolis criterion is focused on this point and was introduced in 1955 by Petropolis, Rosenbluth and Teller in analogy with the thermodynamic probability of reaching some certain energy configurations. They called their method simulator annealing. They were trying to simulate on the computer the cooling of a molten metal that, if it is done very quickly, gives us an amorphous glass-like structure, while if we give more time to cool down, it can reach a crystal-like structure. The Boltzmann distribution is a probability theory, a distribution that gives the probability of reaching a certain state as a function of the state energy, that we will call epsilon obviously is greater than 0, and of the temperature of the system to which the distribution is applied. The equation is the probability to reach a certain state of energy epsilon is given by z, that is a normalization constant, times the exponential value of minus epsilon divided by kb multiplied by the absolute temperature T. Kb is the Boltzmann constant. As we can see, with large T, the probability to reach any epsilon value is almost 1 because we have t on the denominator of the exponent. So when t is very large, this means that the exponent is almost 0, and so exponential is very close to 1. So every energy configuration has a large probability to be accepted. On the other side, when t goes to 0, the probability goes also to 0, because if we divide by a very small number the exponent, it becomes a very large negative value, and the exponential tends to be almost 0. So having in mind this, we can say, okay, it's heuristic, but well, what does it have to do with optimization? Now let's introduce an optimization analogy for the Boltzmann probability. The idea is try to look for the minimum of our function in a way analogous to what physical systems do to reach the energy minimum. So actually we have a natural way of reaching a minimum that works, and we are also looking for the minimum. So why don't we try to do it the same way? Define an energy. Obviously it's a kind of energy, but define this is a F nu minus F old. So this is something that greedy algorithms accept only if epsilon is lower than 0, because F nu must be smaller than F old. But now, as a probabilistic algorithm, we define the probability p that is equal to the exponential minus epsilon divided by k times t prime. Okay, this time k is not the Boltzmann constant, it's just a constant that normalizes the value of the objective function, and t prime is a control parameter that goes from 0 to 1. As we can see, if epsilon is lower than 0, so if f nu is lower than f old, the probability that we get is larger than 1. So actually we accept, because if it is larger than 1, it means that it has 100% of probability of accepting it. On the other side, if epsilon is larger than 0, we can accept only if p is larger than tau. So actually what we will do is something like a virtual dice rolling. We generate a random number, tau, between 0 and 1, and if the probability p that we computed by means of the Boltzmann-like formula is larger than tau, we accept the configuration, otherwise we reject it. Again, with t prime going to 0, the acceptance probability becomes very low. So actually this t prime can be used, for instance, in the first part of our search. We can accept all the configuration just for exploring the objective function landscape. Why? Once we think we are close to a good region, we can lower the temperature and accept only downhill move. So on the minimum search, let's try to make an example. Let's say we have this function with two minima, and let's say that we are on the blue points. We have f old is equal to 0.25, while f nu is equal to minus 0.5. Actually, here we don't use any normalization constants, as the value are quite around the unit value, but obviously this is not always the case. So now epsilon is negative because f nu is lower than f old. And then we have to look at p. This time p is larger than 1, so actually we accept for any value of t prime. On the other side, let's look at the red points that are an uphill movement. Obviously, if we accept only downhill movement, we would just get trapped in this local minimum. Instead, let's try to have another configuration. We have an uphill movement, so for instance, the f old is equal to minus 0.25 and f nu is equal to 0. So this move would never be accepted by a greedy algorithm, but with probabilistic criterion we have some chances. With the epsilon equal to f nu minus f old is equal to 0.25. If t prime is equal to 1, the exponential minus epsilon over t prime is 0.78, so almost 80% probability of accepting this move. Otherwise, if t prime becomes 0.1, the probability goes down lower than 10%. So actually this means that using cautiously the parameter t prime, we can decide when accepting the uphill movement. So a search with this assessment can escape local minima. What is obvious is that we lose on the other side, the speed of convergence, because now, when we think that we have found the local minimum, we have to go on looking for other regions. So now we come to metaheuristics. The process of setting new configuration by means of the metropolis criterion can be used as an example for metaheuristic strategy. The main ingredients of metaheuristics are: they make no hypothesis on the objective function. They use an analogy with natural problem-solving phenomena. That means, for instance, the cooling or the annealing of the molten metal. They adopt a random factor, so not always the lower the better, and thus sometimes we leave comfortable local minimum to look for the global one. They must find a parameter that balances the exploration-exploitation trade-off. They have a non-deterministic outcome. Since their performance depends on random factors, their accomplishment must be evaluated on different runs in a statistical way. In general, metaheuristics can be adapted to different problems easily because they only need the computation of the objective function without making any hypothesis on the function, for instance, differentiability. In addition, they use few control parameters whose value must be learned by trial and error that can be different from problem to problem. Well, we did a step forward indeed, but we can do something better again. We talk now of a single point versus population. So the example proposed was comparing a new configuration with an old one. So this means that every time until we have computed a new value of the objective function, we cannot make any decision. So this would require a serial approach to the optimum search. A more powerful form is the one where the search is performed with a whole population of solutions at each step. The main ideas behind that are to exploit correlation and synergies among population members, to take advantage of parallel processing in the computation of objective function. For instance, each computation of the objective function can be evaluated at different cores of one computing machine. Several approaches have been proposed, but the attention here will focus on three main metaheuristics paradigms: evolutionary or genetic algorithm, particle swarm optimization, and the artificial immune system. Evolutionary or genetic algorithm. So, evolutionary algorithms set the optimization scheme from the inspiration of the biological process of evolution of species, firstly proposed by Charles Darwin. The reason of two ways of referring to them, either as genetic or evolutionary, lies in their historical development that we can reconduct to two seminal works, that is one from Vogel, Artificial Intelligence Through Simulated Evolution, published in 1966, and then another one, very important book, Adaptation in Nature Artificial System by John Holland, published in 1975. So these two books are just presenting different ideas, but were looking for the same paradigm. So notwithstanding their origin, their main common feature and analogy with the natural phenomenon is that we have a population of individuals that are represented by suitable data structure based on real numbers or binary coding, representing the genetic outfit of an individual. Then the measuring of the fitness of each individual in scalar optimization usually is the objective function. On the basis of this concept, the evolutionary cycle is based on selection, a fitness proportionate selection mechanism that picks up some of the most fit individuals to be in an intermediate population that is often called the mating pool, where they become the parents of the new generation. The new population individuals are generated through genetic operators that are mainly crossover, mixing together more than one individual in the mating pool, and mutation, perturbing the outfit by a small random change. So for instance, let's think that we have a population of 6 individuals in the mating pool, so they are just made of 3 degrees of freedom. Each of their segments can be vertical or leaning to the right or leaning to the left. We can combine this kind of characteristic and we want to generate a new configuration. We can use crossover, so actually we take 2 individuals in the population and we combine them in order that a part of the genetic outfit comes from, for instance, the green individual and some from the red individual. And so we generate a new individual. Then a mutation can be applied. So this is what usually is happening in the biological cell, where there is an error in the copy of one part of the genetic outfit in one of the offspring. So, by some random value, for instance, we can change the state of these particular degrees of freedom and going from this configuration on the left to the one on the right. Another analogy is used to solve optimization through the swarm intelligence. This kind of intelligence is different from one of the single individual. None of the single entities that is taking part in this population has the ability to solve the problem of its own, but the problem solution comes from the social interaction of more than one entity in a group. Collective interaction is then the key to problem solving. Examples in nature are ant colonies, flock of birds moving around looking for food. Again, here we have a seminal book that was written by James Kennedy, Russell Arbor, and Hugo Ishii. So the idea is that many of the social interaction among the individuals in a group are simple, and they can be modeled in simple equations simulating the swarm dynamics. So a flock of birds in motion, for instance, depends on the coordination of the birds that are flying. Actually, this process is not centrally coordinated, but obeys simple rules. Actually, there is no central entity that tells every bird what to do, but every bird manages its own position in the flock. So each bird must follow its neighbors, try to stay in the flock, not becoming a prey for predators like hawks, avoid collision with other birds. In addition, all the birds share a common target. They are looking for food, so if someone finds food, moves in that direction, and other colleagues will try to do that. In scalar optimization, a good value of the objective function resembles the finding of the resources of food. Starting from a distribution of position and velocity of the storm at a given instant in the design space, new configurations are generated applied trade-off among simple rules like, on one side, cognitive of keep your trajectory, or on the other side, social or follow the leader. The simple rule to update velocity and position can drag the swarm to the minimum of the function. Then artificial immune system. Artificial immune system is another analogy, and it's based on the fact that living bodies must protect themselves from natural enemies, for instance viruses and bacteria. So what it is, usually every high-level living organism has a way of defending from outside enemies. The immune system inside our body is a distributed set of guardians looking for intruders. They know every kind of cell in our body, self, and thus we can detect alien cells, that known self, that are dangerous. So this is what happens in nature, but how can we use this in optimization? Immune system must focus on diversity, as the number of enemy cells, what we call the antigens, are overwhelming in number and shapes, while immune system has a set of limited resources, the antibodies. The key to success is that we must use our resources in a very efficient way. So the main rule described in the work of immune system are associative recognition of the alien, non-self, and the evolution of the most promising cells that recognize the enemy by cloning and selection. So it is like a microevolution inside the body, but where the only operator is mutation, but not crossover. The problem looks like a parallel evolution search where only the mutation operator is acting, and this is trying to select, for instance, an antibody that recognizes this particular antigen whose shape is different from the self cells. In our next video, we will have a short demonstration of how this metaheuristic technique works on some benchmark function. Thank you for your attention.